Container gardening can be very enjoyable for people of all ages and physical abilities. When someone plants into a container, it can either be to replace traditional gardening, usually due to space or disability reasons, or it can add to an existing landscape or gardening situation. Container gardening can also extend your growing season by allowing you to grow many different plants indoors when the weather gets too cold for them to grow outside. The first step in container gardening is to get a container to plant your selected plant material in. This container can be a ceramic or clay pot that you purchased from a store, or it can be anything else that you can think of. As long as it will hold soil and some amount of water in it, it can be a container to grow things in. Use your imagination to find interesting containers to place around your landscape or within your home for houseplants, herbs, and winter-grown vegetables. The only thing you need to keep in mind when choosing a container to grow plants in is that it has to have drainage holes. If it does not come with or have some sort of drainage holes in the bottom, you need to make these holes. When a container does not have a place to drain, the water will sit in the pot, allowing for root rot to take effect on your plants and eventually kill the plants. The next step in starting a new container garden is to select the growing media. Garden soil that you would find in your outdoor garden is not a good choice for container gardening. The best option would be to use a potting soil or a soilless mix containing peat moss, perlite or vermiculite, and sand. Using potting soil or a soilless mix will allow you to have lightweight, well-aerated, and well-drained soil for best growth of the plants. These mixtures have a lot of organic matter in them to hold on to the water and to add nutrients to the plant root system. However, they also have enough airspace in them so that all the pore space does not fill completely with water, drowning the roots of the plants. The rest of the steps for growing plants in containers are fairly simple, but the biggest is to keep them watered. The main disadvantage of planting in containers is that the plants have a much more limited root system than they would if they were planted outside in the ground. In Nebraska, we have to work hard to keep our potted plants from drying out too fast. This is especially true if we are placing those containers on the south or west side of the house. Be sure that the plants are kept adequately moist throughout the entire day. There are two different ways of watering in containers. The first is by hand, either with a garden hose or with a watering can. This you may have to do a couple of times a day throughout the hottest part of the summer to keep up with the winds, heat, and intense sunlight. If you do not want to do this or are unable to keep up with the watering needs, you can set each pot up with drip irrigation or a soaker hose as shown in this photograph. This will allow the plant to stay watered more evenly throughout the day. Be sure to take care to not water over the top of the plant if you can avoid it. Watering over the top of plants allows for water to get on and stay on the leaves, and that makes a great environment for diseases. As annual plants and even some perennials grow up and continue to rebloom, you may want to deadhead these plants, removing the spent flower heads as they die out. This deadheading will help keep the plant looking healthy, and it will keep the plant looking nice in your containers. The final question to take into consideration when planting container gardens is what to plant in them. You can plant almost anything you can plant outside as long as the pot is big enough for the root system. A nice touch that you can do is to make your garden have aesthetic intrigue for all 4 seasons of the year. The spring and summer are fairly easy to cover, with beautiful flowers in those 2 seasons. There are many options for spring and summer plantings. The fall can be covered by adding in some late summer, early fall blooming plants, or plants that are pleasing due to their foliage, such as ornamental grasses. Finally, the winter can be a good location for some types of plants. Evergreen plants, such as junipers, can be left in a container all year to add some winter interest, as long as the container is large enough to support the root system and the freezing and thawing that occurs during the winter. Junipers can be added into the background of your container and surrounded by flowering plants to give it more interest during the spring, summer, and fall. Ornamental grasses will also give a nice winter interest if left up during the winter and cut back in the spring. Another fun activity to do in a container garden is to plant edibles in containers. You can plant many fun, different types of plants into containers, including leafy greens, dwarf trees, vegetables, and herbs. Lettuce, spinach, and other leafy vegetables do great in containers. Herbs can be grown all year long in a windowsill in your kitchen for quick, easy access to fresh herbs while cooking. Citrus trees can be grown in containers. These do best in a sunroom or greenhouse type environment because they need high humidity. There are also many other vegetable varieties that can be grown in containers on a patio, such as cucumbers, zucchini, peppers, tomatoes, and many more. You should look for a patio variety for some of these to ensure that they do not grow too large for the container. If you are planting a vining crop like cucumbers, you may want to add a trellis for the plant to vine on. Succulents also make a great container planting, especially when done in a desert garden situation. These would be good for those areas where you cannot keep the plants watered enough. Succulents would require less water than traditional plants and would therefore be a great planting for in a container on a south or west side of a building that gets full sun. There are many options for succulents, and they all have quite unique vegetation that would be fun for many gardeners. These can even be kept inside for fun, aesthetic quality all year. Container gardening is fun for all. It is a good way to be able to garden when it may not physically be possible for someone. It is also a nice way to spruce up a patio or add color to an otherwise drab environment. Container gardening is a great alternative for those living in apartments or condos where they would not be able to have a traditional garden. Container gardens are not very difficult to get started and do not take much work. They are also going to be easier to care for because the weeds and insects are easier to control in such a small environment. It is easier to hand pick weeds and hand pull off insects. If you can manage the watering issue, container gardening is fun and it can change so often, even with the seasons. So this spring, when you are deciding what to plant where, or when you think that you want fresh tomatoes and don't have the space for a garden, think about container gardening. For the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nicole Stoner.